Welcome again to this evening's Living Wisely, Living Well satsang. Each week at this time, we take a daily reading from Swamiji's book by the same name and use it as the theme for our discourse and our sharing. My name is Nayaswami Jaya, and I'd like to take the reading from today and begin with it. And it's one that I think all of us can relate to, as I'll explain. Consideration for other people is a sign of maturity. It shows openness to different realities from one's own and is necessary to man's struggle to pull himself out of the mud of egotism. Now, it just so happens that this reading of consideration for others is also one of the readings in one of Swamiji's other books, Affirmations for Self-Healing. And I would like to also read what he has to say about this topic of consideration for others. Consideration for others is one of the marks of a refined spirit. Many people on the spiritual path feel that, since it is within that they are seeking the kingdom of God, and since they are working at developing a spirit of non-attachment, it doesn't matter how they express themselves to others. Indeed, their inconsiderateness is an affirmation of their independence of the opinions and feelings of others. If God is pleased, they tell themselves, what matters the displeasure of man? Yet, by unkindness, we can never please God, who is all kindness itself. Sensitivity to others is a way of self-expansion. One truly achieves freedom in himself when he can respect their realities, because he is wholly at peace with his own. I suspect that many of you are parents. I know I have a daughter. She's grown up now, of course, and has her own life, but her name is Shama. And I look back upon those years of after she was born, and particularly those early years of raising a child. And those of you who have been blessed with that experience, I think, can relate to the experience that my wife Sadhana Devi and I shared. When a child is young, they're very few years. Just one of the primary responsibilities of a parent is, yes, taking care of them and feeding them and meeting their needs. But very soon they begin to develop into little human beings of their own self. They begin to relate to other children, and then adults come into their lives. And if you'll notice, children at a very young age tend to be very self-centered. They basically, their reality is their own small world of their needs, and then of course it expands to the world of their mother, and then eventually also the father as well, or those people who take care of them. But they don't relate to the larger reality in the way, of course, that they would once they grow up and as they become an adult. So in a sense, they're very self-centered in that way. And one of the jobs of a parent, of course, is to introduce them to a larger reality, to help them understand that there are other children. How can they get along with those other children? How can they relate to other adults in their world? And this process of learning children, you might say, to mind their manners and be kind to other children, to share their toys. This is one of the processes that of what parenthood is about, of teaching children how to grow up and to relate to that world. There's a friend of Sadhana Devi's and mine in Pune, and they have a little boy, and he's grown up a little bit now. But when he was a young child, he was typically this way. He was very much relating to his parents, but with any other adult or perhaps even other children would come into their lives, he learned to speak. And one of the first phrases that he learned was the words, "Get out." And so he would tell others, if he was an adult would be come up to him and say hello, and he would say, "Get out." And he enjoyed this very much. And but his parents, of course, were a little bit abashed by this, and his parents say, "No, no, you shouldn't. Not That's not very nice. You should say, you shouldn't say, it's not. How do you think people will feel?" And they tried to explain it to him and get him to expand his thinking to something a little bit larger. And they had some success because after a little bit of time went by, he learned a new phrase. He added to it. Instead of just saying, "Get out," he learned to say, "Get out, please." Which was progress. That was progress. But now, of course, a little bit more time has gone by. He's a very, very nice and mild and kindly young boy. But children go through this phase in life, and it's a natural phase. It's a natural phase of learning to become socialized, to learning there are larger realities of oneself than one's own little world. And if we carry that forward with hopefully which we will, it as an adult, this ability to take in the realities of other people, to be considerate of other people's feelings, to express that in one way or another in our lives. This is the mark, as Swamiji says in his reading, this is the mark of a refined person. But I think if we look out in the world, we can see that there are many souls that somehow miss the refinement part and aren't always so considerate. And even sometimes people that are generally refined in their lower moments will forget that refinement and think of themselves rather than thinking and being considerate to other people. We see that some parents, unfortunately, bring up their children and they miss this part of their duty as a parent for the child, to be able to have them think of the welfare of their little friends or of the adults that come into their lives. And if such a upbringing happens, it's a shame. It's a pity in a way, because we sometimes think in our kindness to children, allowing children to have their way, allowing to accede to their every little desire that they have, and to behave however they choose to. Perhaps people, in a sense of their love for their children, think they're doing their child a favor, but really they're not. It's not so much for the child learning to behave, the child learning to consider the welfare of others. It's for their benefit. The ability for a person to be able to sacrifice my particular need and to be able to look out for the need of another. It's for my benefit that I learn to do that, because how I learn to treat others will be, in a sense, for a very selfish sense, as I treat other people, as I treat other children, those children will treat me as well. It's, you might say, the golden rule: do unto others as you would have them do to you. The life and this world tends to reciprocate the energy that we put out. It tends to come back in that direction. Just from a purely selfish point of view, it's in our best interest to learn to be able to treat other people well, to consider them, to follow the golden rules. And this has a benefit for the child. He learns on the playground. If I share my toys with somebody else, and that child will learn to share his toys with me. For the parent who doesn't teach his children in this way, unfortunately, that child is not going to be well served, because they'll have to learn these lessons on the playground of life, you might say. We have to, because it's how the world works. That energy that we put out is that energy that will come back to us. But there's a deeper side to this as well. We are come into this world and we're consumed with our own small realities in life, but we begin to realize that to be locked in to the confines of our own reality is to be locked into a prison of our own ego. The way to happiness is to be able to take down those walls that separate me from other people, and to be able to go over those walls or break those boundaries and to include other people in my happiness. Now, why is that? It's because on a very deep level, we are those other people. See ourselves as separate from everybody else locks us into a very small reality. But when we learn to expand, to include in our sympathies other people, we find that in this expansion of our sympathies, to see that yes, that person too is I, that I reside there in them just as well as much as I reside in myself. In this sense of expansion, our own reality of who we are also expands. And there's a basic principle in life, a basic principle of our reality, which we discover as we grow, as we become from children into adults, that when we have a sense of expansion, there is always with that sense of expansion of our reality a sense of joy. Joy accompanies a sense of expanded reality. And the opposite is true as well. Wherever we are, or whenever we are contractive in our thinkings, when we think just in terms of ourselves, it's as if we build a wall around ourselves and we become the prisoner of that wall, and it begins to contract smaller and smaller and smaller. So consequently, selfishness, the inability to consider other people's realities, the unkindnesses, these attitudes tend to make our world smaller. And whenever there is contraction, there is a sense of unhappiness. Test it for yourself in your life. You'll see that love, kindness, a sense of inclusion, a sense that makes your reality larger, you will always, on some deeper level, feel a sense of joy when it's in that expression of your reality being larger. Paramahansa Yogananda said that this expansion of sympathies is the social pathway to God. Now, there's many pathways: the inner pathway, meditation, the practices of Kriya that we follow, the Raja Yoga path, but there's also accompanying it, and these are never exclusive. We all express each of these ways to God in our life. The social way to God, he says, is to think larger and larger in terms of your reality. We begin as a little child thinking only of ourselves. We then naturally learn to express our sympathies and our love for our mother, our father, and then our family, brothers and sisters. And for many people, this is as far as it goes. It's their family consideration of us four and no more, or perhaps our extended family. That is the boundaries of our sympathy. And so you see this is world over. One can think of one family, but beyond that, people are other. But if we can learn to break that boundary and begin to think of our friends also, they are included in our love. Then we begin to think of our neighbors, those people we interact with, our co-workers, people that we have some connection with. Try to extend your sense of family, spiritual family, to those as well. And you'll feel that they too are included in your spiritual aura of sympathy. And you'll find that your sense of self will begin to grow. Then take it a step further beyond those people that you know individually, perhaps your neighborhood, the people in your city, the people in your nation. Now, of course, you have a sense of some connection, even though you may not know them, you probably have some sense of connection with that larger grouping. But then take it even further and try to include everybody, and even beyond people into the world at large, until the whole world becomes our family. When we can do this, we break the bonds of egotism that are binding us into this small world that is simply us four and no more, that small family. Make the whole world your family. And this is what we see in the lives of saints, the lives of the great ones. Anyone who came in to the life of Paramahansa Yogananda, crossed his path, was included in his sympathies. And even those he never met, he felt the whole world was his family. This is the mark of a saint, and this is what we want to be as well, so that we're not locked into this littleness. Now, the active expression of that consideration for others is very often thought of in terms of kindness. This is one of the marks of a refined soul. And yesterday, when I was thinking about this topic, I came across a saying or a quote from the Dalai Lama that I thought was very nice. I'd like to share with you. The Dalai Lama says, "This is my simple religion. There is no need for temples, no need for complicated philosophy. Our own brain, our own heart is our temple. The philosophy is kindness." Now, isn't that beautiful? When we have consideration for others, but it's necessary, if we really do consider others, to express that in some fashion, to put it into active outward manifestation. And often one of the easiest ways to do that is in terms of kindness. Think in terms of how can we act today, tomorrow, when you go out. How can you express kindness in some fashion? Now, it's easy to express kindness perhaps to somebody you know, somebody with whom you have a relationship, but can you take it to the next level? Is there somebody that you don't know? Perhaps you meet on the street, or perhaps you meet in a shop. Think consciously, I'm going to express an act of kindness to this person, not because it's going to give you something in return, although it may, because kindness tends to be returned with kindness. But yet, feeling a sense of God, sharing an expression of God. Each of us are devotees of the divine, or each of us perhaps we're also disciples of a great master, those of you that are disciples. Feel yourself expressing their consciousness, God's consciousness, through your actions of kindness. Just being in no big ways, just in small ways. And you'll find that, yes, that person may be benefited. Sometimes a person who's sad has, there's very little perhaps in their life that is giving them an uplifted feeling. Your touching them may make a difference. But it's not so much I'm saying this for the benefit that you give others, as valuable as that is, but what it does for you. Because when you remember to be kind, let's say in this case to another person, when you learn to consider the welfare of others, you have summoned up that flow of the divine through you. And remember what we always say, the instrument is blessed by that which flows through it. And so we want to be an instrument for blessings. And how can we express those blessings? By simple acts of kindness. Now, there's another aspect that I wanted to touch on with this consideration for others. It's also the mark, besides being that of a refined soul, consideration for others is also the mark of somebody who aspires, or is naturally, whether they aspire or not, is recognized by others as a leader. Somebody who has the qualities of leadership must embody this quality of consideration for others. Now, we don't often, at first, perhaps think of the relationship between those two. But yet, if you look, which person do you admire who is a leader? Not the dictator who demands obedience or demands people to follow, but a true leader is somebody who can magnetize other people to be able to follow their lead in some endeavor, whatever that might be, out in business, out in some action. Who has that quality of leadership? And you'll find that a true leader who is able to voluntarily magnetize other people to voluntarily follow their lead is somebody who has the ability to think of the welfare of others, to be able to include other people in his reality, to be able to, out of the desire to help, to serve, to do something positive, is able to draw other people into that aura. This ability to consider the welfare of others is essential if one is going to be a good leader, because we have to consider all people's welfare. What's in the best interests of everybody? So many leaders, unfortunately, seem to be thinking, what's in the best interest for me, or what's in the best interest for my family, or those people who have elected me perhaps into my position. That is a very limited type of leader. But a true leader, not in the political sense, but in terms of a human sense, is somebody who has the ability to think of the welfare of others. And naturally, you give your allegiance and your loyalty to such a person. Some while ago, I was reading an article in a magazine, or perhaps I guess it was on the internet these days, not so much newspapers anymore. But I was reading this article about a person in a city that was riding on the subway transit system there. And this person became very ill. I don't remember. Perhaps it was a heart attack. I'm not quite sure what it was. But the person collapsed in a carriage full of people. The person collapsed onto the floor and was lying on the floor. And now, what would you think would be the reaction? What would your reaction be? I hope your reaction would be, I would hope mine would be too, is I would go to that person's aid. Isn't that what comes to mind? Can I help you? We need to have help. We need to have medical assistance, whatever it might be. A person stumbles, falls, and might hurt themselves. Well, unfortunately, and this is sort of the sad part of the story, that wasn't the first reaction of the people in this carriage. The first reaction was when it came to the stop, and it was nearing the stop. The first reaction is everybody, as quick as possible, vacated the carriage and left the poor gentleman there on the floor. They wanted to get away from it as quickly as possible. And what happened, of course, is new people came into the carriage, and their first reaction, of course, was to back up and avoid it. Until finally somebody came forward and actually had the moral courage or the sense of rightness to actually inquire what was happening. And then other people, seeing that first person, or two persons, I believe it was, help that person, then they too came to the aid. Now, two things are interesting there. One is the fact that in this case, people's first reaction was to not help. Now, that's sad. Now, that obviously, I don't know why people were like that. They were fearful. When they were interviewed after, they said, well, they were afraid that they didn't, or second, they didn't want to become involved. And of course, they're interrupting their busy lives to become involved in that. And eventually, though, somebody did come forward. And now that was the part that I was grateful to see. Somebody came forward who had some of this ability of leadership within them, to see a situation and to stand outside of one's own personal concerns and to take action, because consideration for others needs to be put into action, and we need to, from time to time, be tested to see what would we do, how would we behave if such a situation happened. And then once he did, or she, I don't remember, once that person took action, then others coming to their senses, you might say, at that point realized, oh my gosh, and then they too joined in. But this is something for each of us to consider. Life tests us, and it's proper that it tests us, and sometimes we fail the test. And if we learn the lesson of whatever that failure was, in this case, people felt somewhat regretful that they didn't help in that time of need, well, then that's good if we've learned the lesson. And of course, I don't blame people if not everybody is going to have the courage to step into a situation where danger might be there. But in this case, the danger was an interruption in their daily schedule. And I found that a little bit sad. Now, I think what the world needs, of course, is it needs examples. It needs examples of all of us as our busy lives seemingly sometimes become more impersonal. Perhaps we don't know our neighbors as well as society once did, and we only know perhaps those immediate people in our family around us. It's vital in this day and age, and very important for us in this day and age, to consciously expand that sense of sympathy. For a devotee, this is a daily challenge. It's something that we don't, it's not in our best interest to go by our first impulses and just to think of only of ourselves. And particularly for those of us who are consciously and intentionally on the spiritual path. Just as in that reading that Swamiji read, some people think, well, I need to be impersonal. I need to stand back. And because God alone is my goal in life, I do not need to think of the welfare of others. If you take that approach, you do so at your spiritual peril, because the result of that will tend to be a hardening of your heart. You'll begin to think of my spiritual path, my spiritual welfare, what's in it for me. And the spiritual life can also be a life of selfishness as well, if we make it that way. The active expression of virtue leads to the highest intelligence, is what Paramahansa Yogananda said, the active expression of virtue. So let's take this message of consideration for others and let's express it, acts of kindness. And if you can't do that physically all the time, out when you're not tested, thank God, we're not tested like those people in that subway, but yet we can, in small ways, be a force, a positive force in life, and we'll find that very naturally our sympathies will begin to expand. We'll see other people as our family, and all who come to us are welcome to join in our spiritual family, and people will feel that. And the benefit, of course, will go to others, but the true benefit will be for each one of us in ourselves. Our sense of sympathy will expand. We'll feel a sense of largeness and happiness, joy, bliss. All of these qualities of the spiritual life will begin to descend upon us very naturally. We don't have to force it. It comes as a natural outgrowth. Joy comes when we feel a sense of expansion. Joy comes when we do expand our reality beyond ourselves to include others. Many blessings to you, and I hope you can take these thoughts into practice in your daily life in the coming week. Until next week, God be with you.